Get your headphones ready. This next story is intense.
The sting of antiseptic usually drowns out everything else in this sterile clinic, even the whispers of privilege from the elite patients. But it couldn't mask the sharp crack of a palm against my cheek, or the rising bile in my throat that followed. I steadied myself against the IV stand, the ghost of that night 3 months ago flashing before me, the same night that changed everything. The world tilted. My mahogany skin burned. A hot, throbbing map of Na Young Lim's fury etched into my jaw. I forced a breath, counting the seconds to keep the darkness at bay. I was a professional, a woman who had survived the collapse of one empire already. I wouldn't break for this one. You incompetent, slow-witted girl. Na Young's voice was like shattered glass. She looked like a high-fashion executioner in her plum silk coat, her hair pulled into a knot so tight it seemed to sharpen the disdain in her eyes. Mr. Park is the key to the Busan merger. If he isn't lucid and stabilized by the time the board arrives, your career isn't the only thing that will be buried. Do you understand? My family's legacy hinges on this alliance, and you're standing here checking titration rates like a common clerk. She stepped closer, the suffocating scent of Chanel No. 5 and old money filling my lungs. She raised her hand again, her diamonds catching the sterile light. I should have you stripped of your license before the sun sets. Welcome back, my shadowed souls and midnight thrill seekers. Before we plunge into this tale of forbidden flames and hidden airs, make sure you're subscribed, smash that like button, and drop a comment with your city's skyline. Let's map our global web of dark romance addicts. Your every tap, every share, fuels these stories of powerful passions and perilous secrets. Cozy up in your hidden corner, lower the lights, and prepare for a journey where one slap ignites and empires fall. Let's ignite. The heavy oak doors of the private suite slammed open. The air didn't just change, it vanished. It was replaced by a pressurized, heavy charge that made the hair on my arms stand up. I didn't need to turn around to know that presence. My body remembered the weight of that silence. Lim Du Siop. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who owned the shadows. His charcoal suit was tailored like armor. His face was a masterpiece of granite, sharp jawline, eyes the color of a midnight sea. "Mother," he said. The word was a low vibration that settled deep in my marrow. "That is enough." Na Young straightened, her hand dropping, though her eyes remained venomous. "Du Siop, this girl is being difficult. The Park Alliance is at stake." I was merely reminding her of her place. Du Siop didn't look at his mother. He didn't look at the elderly man moaning in the bed. His gaze was a laser, locked onto the swelling red mark on my face. Recognition flickered in those dark depths. It was followed by a flash of something dangerously like rage. He stepped toward me. I felt a violent wave of morning sickness, not just from the slap, but from the sheer intensity of his focus. "Not now, little one," I pleaded silently, clutching the cold metal of the IV stand. "Stay hidden." "The nurse is doing her job," Du Siop said, his voice dropping an octave. He was standing so close now that I could feel the heat radiating from him. "And you, mother, are overstepping. Go to the car. Now. I will handle the merger. And I will deal with this." Na Hyung saw something in her son's eyes that silenced her. She turned on her heel, her silk coat swishing with a sharp, angry hiss. The door clicked shut, leaving a silence so thick it felt like physical weight. I turned my back to him, pretending to check the IV bag. My fingers trembled. "I need to record the vitals," I muttered, my pulse hammering. "Please keep your voice down." "Mr. Park needs rest." I could feel him behind me. A dark sun. He didn't move. He just watched. I used every ounce of my foster father's training to keep my posture straight. I was Ranini Pilot, the nurse, not the woman who had cried out his name in a darkened penthouse 3 months ago. Suddenly, his hand shot out. His fingers caught my chin. He forced me to turn. The movement was swift, absolute. His touch was cold, but it sent a bolt of electricity straight to my core. He tilted my head, examining the bruise. His thumb brushed against my lower lip. A caress. A claim. The nausea hit me again, sharp and localized. I gasped, my face paling. I leaned away, gripping the counter, but his other hand moved to my waist to steady me. His palm flattened against the slight, nearly invisible swell of my lower abdomen, a detail my scrubs usually hid, but his touch found it instantly. He froze, his eyes dropped to where his hand rested, then snapped back to mine. The tension was a cord stretched to the point of snapping. I saw his nostrils flare. He was reading me, decoding me. "You're pale," he remarked. His voice was a low rumble. "And your pulse is racing. Is it the slap, or is it me?" "It's the shift," I lied. My voice was a whisper. "It's been a long day, Mr. Lim. You know my name," he said. It wasn't a question. He stepped into my space, pinning me between the counter and his frame. He leaned in. His breath was warm against my ear. It sent shivers down my spine that I hated. "And I know yours now. Ranini." A beautiful name for a woman who runs away in the middle of the night. He pulled back, just enough to look into my soul. There was a predatory hunger there, a sharp, calculating intelligence. He noticed the way I avoided his gaze. He noticed the way I held my breath. He noticed the way his hand felt against my stomach. He leaned in closer. His lips almost touched mine. His voice became a dangerous, jagged whisper. What are you doing here? This isn't over." The door clicked shut behind Du Seop as he followed his mother into the hall, leaving me alone in the sterile silence of Mr. Park's suite. My knees buckled. I caught myself on the edge of the mahogany desk, my breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. The scent of his sandalwood cologne still clung to my scrubs, a phantom weight that made my skin prickle. I needed to move. I needed to disappear into the mundane rhythm of the clinic before he came back. I retreated to the staff break room, the fluorescent hum overhead sounding like a hornet's nest. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need them. I walked straight to my locker, my fingers fumbling with the combination. Inside, tucked behind a textbook on advanced pharmacology, was a small plastic sleeve. I pulled out the folded thermal paper, the ultrasound I'd had done at a different clinic across town under a false name. I stared at the grainy image, a tiny flicker of life no bigger than a bean. "Not now, little one," I thought again, the memory of Du Seop's hand against my stomach returning with a jolt of electricity. The cold air of the break room suddenly felt like the drafty balcony of the winter gala 3 months ago. I could almost taste the vintage champagne on my tongue, crisp, bubbly, and expensive. I had been there as a standby medic, hidden behind a lace cat mask that scratched the bridge of my nose. He had been a shadow in a tuxedo, his mask a silver wolf that glinted under the chandeliers. We hadn't spoken, not at first. It was the way he looked at me, like I was the only solid thing in a room full of ghosts. When he led me to the darkened library, the smell of old leather and rain-dampened earth had enveloped us. His hands had been everywhere, rough, possessive, dragging me into a fire that burned away my caution. He hadn't been a boss then. He'd been a storm. I remember the weight of him, the way he'd gripped my hair, and the heat of his skin against mine as the world outside ceased to exist. A sharp metallic clang, someone hitting a trash can in the hallway, shattered the memory. I shoved the ultrasound into my pocket and turned to leave, but the door swung open before I could reach for the handle. Du Seop. He didn't just walk in, he invaded. He shut the door behind him and locked it with a soft, final click. The break room felt microscopic. He loomed over me, his jaw so tight I could see the muscle leaping. His nostrils flared, his eyes tracing the line of my throat as if he could see my pulse jumping there. "You're shaking," he whispered. It wasn't a comfort. It was an observation of a hunter watching his prey. "I'm tired, Mr. Lim," I deflected, stepping back until my spine hit the cold vending machine. I kept my voice clinical. "I have patience. You're trespassing in a staff-only area. I don't care about the rules of this building," he hissed, stepping into my space. He was so close I could see the silver flecks in his dark irises. He reached out, his hand hovering near my waist, not touching, but the heat of it burned through the fabric. "That night, you vanished. No name, no number. Why are you here, Ranini? Why now?" "I work here. It's a job," I said. My eyes locked on his. I didn't blink. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. "I didn't seek you out. If I'd known you owned the air this clinic breathes, I'd have worked in a different burrow. He laughed, a low, humorless sound that sent a chill down my spine. You think I believe in coincidences? My mother slaps you, and I find you carrying something. You looked like you were going to faint when I touched you. I saw his fist clench at his side. He was losing his legendary control. He suspected, but he wanted me to break first. He wanted the confession. I reached into my pocket. My fingers were steady now. I pulled out the ultrasound and held it between us. I'm 12 weeks along, I said. No preamble, no softness, just a medical fact delivered with the precision of a scalpel. The silence that followed was absolute. Dusiop's eyes dropped to the paper. For a split second, the Shadow Emperor disappeared. His face went pale, a flicker of genuine raw shock crossing his features before the mask of the Mafia boss slammed back into place. He snatched the paper from my hand, his grip so tight he nearly tore it. This proves nothing, he growled, his voice trembling with a dark, dangerous energy. Anyone could have fathered a child. You think a single night makes this mine? You think you can use a brat to crawl into the limb treasury? I felt a flash of genuine anger, cold and sharp. I stepped forward, closing the remaining inch between us until my chest almost brushed his silk tie. I leaned into his ear, my voice a calm, cutting whisper in fluent, dialect-perfect Korean. Jeokumyeon yong wani neowi jeot era hait jan ah. Duseop froze. He looked like I'd just driven a stake through his heart. Those were the words he had whispered into the crook of my neck at the gala, in the height of our shared fever. That dream? I said it would be yours forever. A phrase too specific, too private to be a guess. How? He breathed, his eyes wide. I told you I'm a nurse, I said, reverting to English, my voice steady. I listen. I remember. And I don't need your money, Dusiop. I only need you to stay away from us. Outside in the hallway, the sharp, rhythmic clack-clack-clack of high heels stopped abruptly just behind the door. I froze. I could hear a sharp, hissed intake of breath through the thin wood. Na young. Pregnant. It's yours. I could almost see her face through the door. The calculation, the predatory hunger for the family legacy, and the absolute loathing for the servant who had dared to trap her son. The silence from the hallway lasted only a few seconds before the heels started again, faster this time, retreating toward the elevators. She hadn't heard the truth of the night, only the confirmation of her worst fears. She wouldn't come in to help. She would go out to destroy. Dusiop didn't seem to notice his mother's departure. He was focused entirely on me. His shock had curdled into something far more terrifying, a dark, possessive calculation. He lunged, his hand snaking out to catch my wrist. His grip was like iron, not enough to bruise, but enough to make it clear I wasn't going anywhere. He pulled me flush against him, his face inches from mine, his eyes burning with a terrifying light. You think you can just tell me this and walk away? He rasped, his voice vibrating against my lips. You think you can hide my heir in some cramped apartment while you work double shifts? No. He leaned in even closer, his thumb pressing firmly into the pulse point of my wrist, feeling the frantic beat of my heart. This changes everything, he whispered, his tone dropping into a possessive growl that made my blood run cold. You aren't leaving this building until I decide what happens to both of you. You're mine now, Ranini, and so is that child. Try to run, and I'll burn this city down to find you. His grip on my wrist was a brand, the heat of his palm seeping through my skin as if he were trying to claim my very DNA. I didn't pull away. To struggle would be to show him where I was soft, and I couldn't afford a single bruise in my armor. I met his midnight sea eyes with a level stare, my heart drumming a steady rhythm against my ribs, not of fear, but of calculation. You speak of burning cities as if I'm a prize to be won, Dusiop, I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. But a cage is still a cage, even if the bars are made of gold and threats. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The air in the break room felt like it was being sucked out by the sheer force of his will. He released my wrist, but only to place his hand on the small of my back, guiding me toward the door. It wasn't a gentle gesture. It was an escort. The hallway was no longer the familiar, sterile corridor of my workplace. It had become a gauntlet. 4 men stood like statues outside the door. They were dressed in charcoal suits that mirrored Dusiop's, their faces devoid of emotion, their hands folded in front of them in a way that didn't quite hide the bulges of holstered weapons under their jackets. I scanned them instantly, my foster father's lessons screaming in the back of my mind. 4 targets. 2 at the 12 o'clock, 2 at the 6. The one on the left has a heavy gait, likely favoring a concealed piece on his right hip. The one on the right is the leader. He's watching the exits, not me. I noted the blind spot near the service elevator, and the way the overhead security camera lagged by 3 seconds on its rotation. I could run. But with a life growing inside me, a high-speed chase through Manhattan wasn't a strategy. It was a gamble I refused to take with someone else's stakes. "Pack your things," Dusiop commanded, his voice vibrating against my shoulder. "You're leaving. Now. I have a shift to finish. Patients who are no longer your concern." He signaled to the lead guard. "Clear her locker. Secure her phone. Move." The extraction was silent and terrifyingly efficient. I was ushered through the basement parking garage, bypassed by the public, and folded into the back of a blacked-out SUV that smelled of new leather and ozone. Dusiop sat beside me, his presence a suffocating weight. We didn't speak as the city blurred into a smear of gray and neon, eventually giving way to the iron-wrought gates of an estate that looked more like a fortress than a home. The Lim estate was a monument to cold opulence. As the car rolled up the gravel drive, the moonlight hit the white marble facade, making it glow like a tomb. Massive floor-to-ceiling glass panes reflected the surrounding woods, and I could see the faint red glint of motion sensors tucked into the manicured hedges. "Welcome home, Ranini," Dusiop said, though the word home felt like a threat. He led me inside, the heels of my nursing shoes clicking hollowly on the polished obsidian floors. The air inside was different, richer, flavored with the faint, expensive scent of burning agarwood and the metallic tang of chilled air. It was a gilded prison, and the silence was heavy enough to drown in. He led me into a sprawling study lined with leather-bound books and shadows. A crystal decanter of amber liquid sat on the desk, alongside a plate of delicate gold-leafed pastries. I felt a pang of hunger, the pregnancy demanding fuel, but I looked at the food with a wary distrust. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a velvet chair. He didn't sit. He paced the perimeter of the room like a wolf. "Let's discuss the terms of your stay." "Terms?" I leaned back, crossing my legs and maintaining an air of boredom I didn't feel. "Usually, a kidnapping doesn't come with a contract. This is protection," he snapped, stopping in front of me. He leaned over, his hands gripping the arms of my chair, pinning me in. "My mother knows. Which means my enemies will eventually know. You are a vulnerability I cannot leave exposed. I offer you a discreet handling of this situation. You will stay here, in luxury, with the best medical care money can buy. When the child is born, we will discuss a settlement that ensures you never have to work another day in your life. You can disappear. Start over." "And the baby?" I asked, my voice as sharp as a needle. "Am I supposed to hand over my child to a man who thinks vulnerability is a crime? Do you plan to erase me from the birth certificate like I'm a typo?" His eyes flared. He reached out, his fingers brushing the hair away from my face. The touch was slow, deliberate, sending a treacherous spark through my nervous system. "You're smarter than the women I usually deal with. That's dangerous for both of us. I'm a nurse, Dusiop. I see the heart for what it is, a muscle. I don't care about your settlement. I'm not being handled. If I stay, it's on my terms. I see my doctors. I have my autonomy. And I want to know why your mother is so terrified of a servant that she'd risk a scene in a public clinic." He leaned in closer, his lips inches from mine. I could taste the faint ghost of the whiskey he'd poured earlier. "My mother is terrified of what she can't control. And right now, I can't control you." He stayed there for a heartbeat too long, the silence between us thick with a dark, erotic tension. Then, he pulled back, his mask of stone returning. "A maid will show you to your room. Do not try the windows. They are reinforced. Do not try the doors. They are monitored." I was led to a suite that was larger than my entire apartment. Silk sheets, a bathtub carved from a single block of jade, and a view of the dark forest. Once the door clicked shut, I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I waited. I stood by the door, listening to the receding footsteps. Then, I began to move. I checked the corners for lenses, found one in the smoke detector, another in the clock. I moved to the walk-in closet where my few belongings had been placed. I began to systematically search the room, not for a way out, but for the secrets of the people who had brought me here. My fingers traced the underside of a heavy oak bookshelf. Click. A hidden latch, a small panel popped open, revealing a dusty leather-bound album that looked out of place in this modern room. I pulled it out, my breath hitching. I flipped through the pages, mostly old black and white photos of the Lim family. But then, I stopped. It was a candid shot from a gala decades ago. In the center was a young, smiling Nay Young, and standing directly behind her, dressed in the uniform of a high-level security detail, was a man I recognized instantly. My foster father. There was a handwritten note in the margin, the ink faded but legible. December 1998. The betrayal is set. No loose ends. Rage, cold and pure, surged through me. This wasn't just a coincidence. My foster family hadn't just been killed. They had been sacrificed by the very people I was now living with. My grip tightened on the photo, my knuckles turning white. Suddenly, the heavy handle of my bedroom door turned. I shoved the photo into the waistband of my scrubs and threw the album back into the hidden compartment just as the door swung open. Dusiop stood there, his coat off, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing as he took in my position near the bookshelf. "You're still awake," he said, his voice a low, suspicious rumble. He stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping over the furniture before landing on me. "What are you doing, Ranini?" I didn't move. The old photograph was a cold weight against the small of my back, tucked into the waistband of my scrubs. I could feel the jagged edge of the paper biting into my skin, a reminder of the blood already spilled for the secrets in this house. "The air is stagnant," I said, my voice as steady as if I were reading a patient's chart. I gestured toward the locked balcony door. "I'm a nurse, Dusiop. I'm used to movement, night shifts, and open windows. Being a bird in a gilded cage is giving me insomnia." He stepped further into the room, his presence dragging the shadows with him. He didn't look at the bookshelf. He looked at me. His gaze drifted down to my hands, which I had clasped in front of me to hide the tremor of adrenaline. He reached out, his fingers cool and smooth, save for the faint, hard ridges of scar tissue across his knuckles, brushing against my palm. My hands were a map of a different life, calloused from years of tightening bandages, scrubbing in, and the repetitive friction of medical tape. The contrast was a jolt, my rough working world reality against his polished, lethal luxury. "Go to sleep, Ranini," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of my lifeline. "Tomorrow you dine with the family. Try to look less like a captive and more like a guest. For your own sake." The dining room the next evening was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The table was a river of dark mahogany, laid with silver that caught the light like whetted blades. In the center, the spread was traditional and overwhelming. The steam from the kimchi jjigae carried a sharp, fermented heat that usually made my mouth water, but today it felt like a suffocating cloud. Galbi sizzled on a porcelain platter, the sweet, salty scent of soy and pear mingling with the bitter aroma of several banchan dishes. Na Young sat at the head, draped in cream-colored silk that made her look like a pearl carved from ice. She hadn't looked at me once, since I sat down. "Duseop," she said, her voice cutting through the clink of silver. "The park merger is finalized, but the board is whispering. They don't understand why you've brought a distraction into the house." "She is not a distraction," Duseop replied, his voice a low warning. He was dismantling a piece of grilled mackerel with surgical precision. Na Young finally turned her gaze to me. Her eyes were chips of flint. A low-class outsider playing at family, she spat. Her English perfect and cruel. "You think because you carry a limb, you belong at this table? Your kind is a temporary necessity, nothing more. You have the soot of the streets on your skin, and no amount of my son's protection will wash away your heritage." The insult was a physical blow, layered with a venom that went deeper than just my profession. It was about the mahogany of my skin, the history she thought I lacked, and and the purity she thought she was defending. The bile rose in my throat, not from the pregnancy this time, but from a decade of suppressed ghosts. I laid my chopsticks down with a soft clack. Nai ga eodaseo wat noon ji dong sin imwel indigo, I said. What do you think you know about where I come from? The silence that followed was deafening. Na Young's glass stopped halfway to her lips. Du Siop's grip on his knife tightened. I didn't stop. I leaned forward, my voice dropping into a flawless, soul-inflected dialect that carried the weight of a knife edge. Dang sin doli basin hansa ramdolo najik do gioke. Ne young abeo gineon igamunol we happy reol hio liot jiman. Dang sin unjo reol so rigi keo reom beo rioteo. I still remember the people you betrayed. My foster father bled for this family, but you threw him away like trash. You speak? Na Young stammered, her face turning a ghostly shade of gray. I speak many things, I said, reverting to English, my heart thundering. I was raised by a man who served the limbs loyally, until someone decided he was a loose end. I am not an outsider. I am the consequence of your past. Du Siop stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. Dinner is over. He grabbed my upper arm, not painfully, but with an urgency that brooked no argument, and hauled me toward the library. He slammed the door, pinning me against a wall of leather-bound volumes. The smell of old paper and his sandalwood cologne enveloped me. Who were you? He rasped, his face inches from mine. His hands moved to my face, his thumbs pressing into my cheeks. Who was your father? His name was Han, I whispered, my defiance flickering like a candle in a storm. I felt his body heat, the hard line of his chest pressing against mine. He was a shadow for your father. He taught me how to hide, how to listen, and how to survive when people like you decide we've outlived our usefulness. Du Siop's eyes darkened, a swirl of confusion and a budding, terrifying obsession. His hand slid down my neck, his thumb tracing the faint scar on my wrist where a needle had once slipped during a double shift. His touch was almost tender, a stark contrast to the violence of his world. No one speaks to you like that again, he muttered, his voice dropping into a possessive growl. Not even my mother. If you are who you say you are, you're even more valuable than I thought. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. For a second, the predator was still. I could feel the vulnerability he tried so hard to mask. I spent months looking for the woman from the gala. I didn't realize I was looking for a ghost from my own childhood. His phone buzzed on the mahogany desk behind him. The vibration sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Du Siop stiffened. He stepped back, the warmth of his body vanishing, replaced by the cold air of the library. He picked up the phone, his face hardening into a mask of stone as he read the message. Is there a problem? I asked, my nursing instincts sensing the shift in his vitals. Ji-hoon, he said, his voice like dry ice. He's asking about the new complications at the estate. He's moving faster than I anticipated. He looked at me then, really looked at me, with a protective fury that made my breath catch. He moved back toward me, his hand catching the back of my neck and pulling me into his space once more. You're not leaving this house, he whispered, his eyes scanning the dark windows behind me as if expecting a bullet. Not until I know exactly who wants you dead. And Renini? If anyone tries to take you, or the heir, I'll show them why they call me the Shadow Emperor. I looked past his shoulder. In the reflection of the glass, I saw a faint, momentary flash of light from the tree line, the lens of a camera, or a scope. We weren't just being watched. We were being hunted. The flash of light from the tree line wasn't a trick of the moon. It was a countdown. Du Siop's hand was still firm on my neck, his thumb tracing my jaw, when the world shattered. A silent, high-velocity round punched through the library's reinforced glass. The pane didn't just break. It spiderwebbed into a million crystalline teeth before collapsing inward. Down. Du Siop roared. He didn't just push me. He shielded me with the full weight of his body as we hit the obsidian floor. The smell of ozone and pulverized stone filled the air. My shoulder barked in pain, a shallow graze from a glass shard or a ricochet. Warmth bloomed through my sleeve. Blood. Shadows detached themselves from the darkness beyond the terrace. 3 men, black tactical gear, suppressed submachine guns. They moved with the synchronized lethality of professional cleaners. "Stay behind the desk," Dusiop commanded. He drew a sleek, matte black pistol from a holster I hadn't even seen, his movements a blur of practiced violence. I didn't just hide. I was a nurse. I was trained to triage chaos. My eyes swept the room. My medical bag was on the side table, but it was too far. I looked at the desk. A heavy crystal paperweight. A fountain pen. A bottle of high-proof rubbing alcohol I'd used to clean his mother's contamination from my skin earlier. Glass exploded again. Dusiop fired back, 2 precise shots that dropped the first intruder mid-stride. But the other 2 were flanking. One kicked through the remaining glass, his weapon leveled at Dusiop's head. I didn't think. I acted. I grabbed the alcohol bottle and the heavy silver lighter from the desk. I flicked the flame and hurled the bottle at the lead attacker's feet. It shattered. A wall of blue fire erupted between us. The man hissed, instinctively shielding his face. That second of distraction was all I needed. I lunged from behind the desk, not with a gun, but with a 10cc syringe I'd kept in my pocket for my own vitamin shots. I didn't aim for his vest. I aimed for the gap in the helmet, the soft tissue of the neck. I slammed the needle home and depressed the plunger, injecting a massive air bolus directly into his carotid. He gasped, his eyes widening in a frantic, suffocating panic as the air hit his brain. He crumpled, his weapon clattering to the floor. "Ranini, move." The third man was on us. He lunged at Dusiop with a serrated combat knife. They locked arms, a brutal dance of muscle and bone. I saw the blade bite into Dusiop's side, a dark stain spreading across his white shirt. I grabbed an IV pole from the corner, a relic from the previous owner's home care setup. I swung it like a staff, the heavy base catching the assassin in the temple with a sickening crack. He faltered. Dusiop didn't hesitate. He jammed his thumb into the man's windpipe and fired a single round into his chest. Silence returned, heavy and thick with the scent of cordite and burnt silk. "Are you hit?" Dusiop wheezed, clutching his side. His face was ghostly pale in the firelight. "I'm fine," I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Stay calm, Ranini. Focus on the wound. You're bleeding. Sit. Now." I pushed him into the velvet chair. The fire from the alcohol was dying out, leaving us in a dim orange glow. I grabbed my medical kit, my fingers moving with a cold, detached efficiency. I ripped his shirt open, exposing the gash along his ribs. It was deep, the edges ragged, blood bubbling with every ragged breath he took. "You're a lunatic," he rasped, watching me as I doused a gauze pad in antiseptic. "You attacked a professional hitman with a syringe." "I'm a nurse," I muttered, my hands steady as I began to clean the wound. "We're used to people trying to kill us. They're usually just elderly and confused." I began to stitch. The needle slid through his skin, a slow, intimate rhythm. I felt the heat of his body, the way his muscles jumped under my touch. His eyes never left my face. The air between us shifted from the adrenaline of death to a heavy, sultry tension. "Why didn't you run?" he whispered. His hand reached out, his fingers, stained with his own blood, tracing the cut on my shoulder. "You could have used the chaos to disappear." "I don't leave my patients," I said, looking up. Our faces were inches apart. I could smell the iron of his blood and the sandalwood of his skin. "And I don't leave the father of my child." He leaned in, his breath warm against my lips. "This empire is cursed, Ranini. Everything I touch turns to ash. My father, my brother. They all paid the price for this throne. Why would you want to be part of this?" "I'm already part of it," I whispered, my thumb lingering on his jaw. "I was born into the shadows you inherited. We're just 2 ghosts trying to find a haunting ground." His hand tightened on my waist, pulling me closer. The stitches were done, but neither of us moved. The world outside didn't exist. There was only the heat of him and the pulse in my throat. He leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a promise of a kiss that was interrupted by a sharp ping from the laptop on the desk. Security alert. I pulled back, my nursing brain clicking back into gear. I grabbed the laptop to check the external cameras, but my eyes caught a flickering window in the background. An encrypted directory. My foster father hadn't just taught me medical skills, He'd taught me that information was the only true currency. I saw a file labeled Project Juan Mayong, the same name I'd seen in the old photograph. "What are you doing?" Dusiop asked, his voice low and dangerous. Checking the perimeter, I lied, my fingers flying across the keys. I saw the password prompt, a simple alphanumeric cipher. I thought back to the photograph. December 1998. I typed 121998 betrayal. The folder spiraled open. My breath hitched. It wasn't a security log. It was a series of wire transfers and memos dated 15 years ago. One stood out, a digital copy of a handwritten order. Target: Han. Reason: potential leak regarding the Busan shipment. Executioner: J.H. Ji-hoon. The man who was currently Duseop's right hand had murdered the only father I'd ever known, and he'd done it on the orders of the Lim family. Renini, Duseop's voice was right behind my ear, cold as a winter grave. I looked up. He was standing over me, his hand resting on the hilt of his discarded knife. He wasn't looking at the cameras. He was looking at the screen. He saw the name. He saw the order. "You shouldn't have looked at that," he said, his voice a flat, terrifying monotone. Beyond the library door, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed, not his guards. These were faster, more aggressive. The alarm on the screen turned red. Interior breach, Sector 4. "He's already inside," I whispered, meeting Duseop's eyes. "Ji-hoon isn't waiting for the shadows anymore." Duseop grabbed my arm, his grip possessive and fierce. "Then we finish this tonight, but if you ever lie to me again about what you're looking for, I won't be so gentle." The footsteps outside the library door didn't herald a second wave of assassins, but a more insidious kind of executioner. Two of Duseop's elite guards filled the doorway, their expressions masks of professional shame as they secured the perimeter. The breach in Sector 4 had been a diversion, a calculated play to keep us pinned while the true blow was prepared. Duseop didn't release my arm. His fingers remained a vis, his gaze fixed on the screen where the evidence of his family's sins lay bare. The silence in the room was agonizing, a heavy, airless vacuum. I could feel the heat of his anger radiating off him, but beneath it was something colder, the sound of a man realigning his world to include me as a threat. "The breach is contained, boss," the lead guard rumbled. "And your mother? She's waiting in the grand salon. She says it's urgent." Duseop looked at me then, his eyes like scorched earth. "It always is." The grand salon was a cathedral of ivory and gold, the air smelling of expensive wax, and the lingering scent of Na Young's floral perfume. She was standing by the fireplace, her back to us, staring at a portrait of a Lim ancestor. When she turned, she wasn't the frantic woman from the clinic. She was a queen preparing to sign a death warrant. On the low marble table sat a stack of high-gloss printouts and a burner phone. "You've been distracted, Duseop," Na Young said, her voice a calm, rhythmic pulse. "By your guilt, by your lust, and by the viper you've invited into our nest." Duseop walked to the table, his movements stiff from the fresh stitches I'd just placed in his side. I followed, my hand instinctively resting on my stomach, a protective shield for the only thing in this house that was truly mine. He picked up the first photo. It was grainy, taken from a high angle. It showed me in a dark alleyway behind the clinic, handing a thick envelope to a man whose face was partially obscured. The timestamp was from 3 nights ago. The next page was a bank statement, a secret account in my name, showing a wire transfer of $500,000 from a holding company linked to the rival Kim syndicate. I found the phone in her locker at the clinic before we moved her. Na Young continued, her eyes never leaving mine. "She's been selling our security protocols. That breach tonight, that wasn't a failure of our men. It was a roadmap provided by the mother of your child." Duseop's face went white, the kind of white that precedes a blizzard. He looked at the photo, then at the bank statement, his jaw tightening until I thought the bone might snap. He turned to me, his voice dropping to a lethal, agonizing whisper. "You played me. You used the baby as bait to get into this house. You looked at my scars and saw a weakness to exploit." The heartbreak in his voice was a physical weight. I felt the floor fall away. I had spent my life reading people, reading vitals, reading the truth in the silence between heartbeats. I saw the wall of ice closing over him, sealing away the man who had almost kissed me an hour ago. Look at the metadata, du Siop, I said, my voice thin but sharp. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. Look at the shadows in that photo. I stepped forward, reaching for the printouts. He jerked them away, his eyes flashing with a possessive, wounded fury. Don't touch them. Give them to me, I commanded, my nursing school authority bleeding through. If you're going to kill me, at least be certain you aren't doing your mother's dirty work. Something in my tone, a fragment of the girl who had survived the foster house fires, made him pause. He slammed the papers onto the marble table. I leaned over them, my mind racing. I wasn't just looking at the image. I was decoding the architecture of a lie. I saw the pixel artifacts around the edges of my hair, a classic sign of a composite. But it was the bank statement that held the true secret. I traced the transaction ID. It was an alphanumeric string that seemed random to the untrained eye. But I had been raised by a man who communicated in ciphers. 7HWANMYEONGBUSAN. I felt a cold thrill of realization. Na Young hadn't just forged this. She had used an old template. She had used the same secure ledger system the Lims had used 15 years ago to pay off the men who murdered my foster father. This transfer ID, I said, pointing to the string. It's a legacy code. Your mother didn't just find this. She generated it using the family's private smuggling ledger, the one linked to the Busan shipments in '98. I looked up at Na Young. She had gone perfectly still, the color draining from her lips. You were so eager to frame me that you used the same cipher you used to authorize the hit on Han, I said, my voice a jagged edge in the silent room. You didn't forge this to protect the family from me. You forged it to protect the family from the truth. You're afraid I'll find out that you were the one who signed the order, not the Kims. The silence that followed was heavy, a suffocating velvet. Du Siop looked from the paper to his mother. He saw the shift in her posture, the way her hand trembled against the silk of her dress. Mother? He breathed. The word was a question, a plea, and a condemnation. I did what was necessary. Na Young hissed, her mask finally shattering. That man was going to expose the shipments. He was going to ruin your father. I protected the legacy. And this woman, she is his legacy. She is an infection in our bloodline. Du Siop turned back to me. The evidence was debunked, the forgery exposed. But the damage was done. The trust wasn't just broken. It was pulverized. He looked at me, and I saw a man who felt like a fool for believing in a connection that was built on a foundation of ancient blood and lies. He stepped into my space, his hand trembling as it hovered near my throat. He didn't grab me. He just stood there, his breath hot against my face, his eyes searching mine for a truth he was no longer capable of seeing. I let you see my scars, he whispered, his voice breaking, and all I see now is a ghost of a war I didn't start. You're a reminder of everything I hate about this life. I am the mother of your child, I whispered back, a single tear escaping my control. And I am the only person in this house who hasn't lied to you. He closed his eyes, a look of pure, unadulterated agony crossing his face. He lowered his hand, his posture slumping as if the weight of the Lim Empire had finally crushed his spine. I can't look at you, he said. It was the most honest thing he'd said all night. Every time I see your face, I see the blood of a man my family murdered. I see the betrayal. I see the lie I almost told myself. He turned his back on me, staring out into the dark, rain-streaked windows. Get out, he said. The words were quiet, but they carried the finality of a tombstone. Du Siop, get out. He roared, turning back with a fury that made even the guards flinch. Before I forget that you're carrying my heir. Before I decide that the only way to end this war is to bury everything associated with it. He signaled to the guards. Remove her. Take her to the safe house in the outer borough. She is to be monitored 24/7. No one goes in. No one comes out. She is a prisoner of the state until the child is born. As the guards grabbed my arms, I looked over my shoulder. Na Young was watching from the shadows of the fireplace, a look of cold, grim satisfaction returning to her features. She had lost the battle of the forgery, but she had won the war for her son's soul. I didn't fight them. I didn't scream. As they dragged me toward the door, I leaned my head back and whispered one final truth into the cold air. You're making the same mistake your father did to Siop. You're pushing away the only person who can help you survive Ji-hun. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, a solitary figure in a room full of gold, as the heavy doors of the grand salon slammed shut behind me. The heavy thud of the grand salon doors echoed like a gavel. It was the sound of a sentence passed. The guards didn't wait. They flanked me, their hands firm on my elbows, guiding me through the marble labyrinth of the estate toward a waiting black sedan. The night air was cold, biting through my thin scrubs as they shoved me into the back seat. I pressed my palm against the cool leather, my other hand instinctively covering the slight swell of my abdomen. We're on our own again, little one. The thought was a jagged shard of ice in my chest. Siop's face, the raw, bleeding heartbreak in his eyes before he turned into a pillar of salt, haunted the dark glass of the window. He hadn't just exiled me, he'd lobotomized his own hope. The ride to the outer borough safe house was silent. I didn't fight. I didn't plead. I sat like a statue, eyes down, faking the hollowed-out compliance of a woman who had finally been broken. But behind my closed lids, I was mapping the turns. Left on Atlantic. A long stretch on the beak. We were headed toward a desolate corner of Queens, where the warehouses outnumbered the people. The safe house was a third-floor walk-up in a building that smelled of damp concrete and old cooking oil. It was a fortress of boredom. Reinforced steel door, bolted windows, 4 cameras, 2 in the main room, 1 in the kitchen, 1 at the entrance. Stay put, the lead guard grunted, locking the door from the outside. Food's in the fridge. Don't make us come in there. I waited. 1 hour. 2. I sat on the edge of the cot, feeling the heavy fatigue of the second trimester settle into my bones. My feet were swollen, my head spinning with the low blood sugar shakiness of a missed meal. I forced myself to eat a dry protein bar from the pantry, every bite a battle against the rising bile of morning sickness. Then, I moved. I headed to the bathroom, the only blind spot in the unit. I turned the shower on full blast, letting the steam fill the small space. I reached into the waistband of my scrubs and pulled out the small, jagged piece of metal I'd swiped from the SUV's door handle during the ride. It wasn't a key, but it was a bridge. I stood on the toilet, reaching for the smoke detector. I knew the limb security model. It was centralized. I used the metal shard to short the internal wiring of the unit. A small pop. A sizzle. The red light on the kitchen camera flickered and died as the circuit surged. I didn't waste a second. I moved to the kitchen, used the same shard to jimmy the lock on the service window, the one the guards assumed was rusted shut. It groaned, a scream of metal on metal that I prayed the steam from the shower would drown out. I slid through, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and dropped onto the rusted fire escape. The street grid of Queens felt like heaven. I vanished into the shadows of the industrial park, my mind already pivoting. I found a 24-hour laundromat 3 blocks away. Using a stolen burner phone I'd tucked into my medical kit weeks ago, I accessed the dark web node my foster father had taught me to use before the fires. My fingers flew across the cracked screen. I wasn't just looking for Ji-hun, I was looking for his digital footprint. I pulled up the encrypted logs I'd scraped from Siop's laptop during the ambush. 11-98 betrayal. I used the cipher to decode the hidden packets tucked into Ji-hun's recent outgoing messages. It was a pattern of dead drops and ghost pings. Vulture to nest. The king is blind. The queen is cornered. Midnight at the forge. The forge, I whispered. It was an old shipyard in Brooklyn, a place where the limbs used to scrap their stolen vehicles. But I couldn't go alone. I needed a ghost. I sent a coded message to a number I'd memorized 10 years ago. A string of prime numbers followed by the medical code for emergency transfusion. 2 hours later, I was standing in a rain-slicked alleyway in Red Hook. A shadow emerged from behind a stack of shipping containers. He was older now, his hair silvered and a deep scar running from his temple to his jaw, but the way he held his silenced Glock was unmistakable. "Ranini," the man rasped. It was Uncle Song, my foster father's most loyal lieutenant, the man everyone thought had burned in the house. "You look like him. You have Han's eyes." And his enemies, I said, my voice tight. Ji-hoon is moving, Song. He's the one who authorized the hit on my father. And now he's coming for the limbs from the inside. Song stepped into the light, his eyes softening as he looked at my stomach. You're carrying the Shadow Emperor's blood. Do you know what they'll do to you if they find you? I know what I'll do to them first, I countered. I have the ledger. I have the proof that Na Young and Ji-hoon have been scrubbing the accounts for years. But I need to know where Ji-hoon is gathering his men. Song handed me a ruggedized tablet. He's not gathering. He's already in place. Ji-hoon isn't just a rival, Renini. He's been building a splinter cell within the limb guards for a decade. He's been waiting for Du Siup to be weak. And right now, with you gone, Du Siup is a ghost. We spent the next 6 hours in a cramped basement apartment, cross-referencing Ji-hoon's encrypted emails with the physical movements Song had been tracking. We found it, an audio snippet from a bug Song had planted in a high-end club. The estate falls at dawn. Ji-hoon's voice was unmistakable, cold, arrogant, and hungry. Kill the mother. Bring the brother to me. I want to see the light go out in his eyes myself. I felt a cold shiver of terror, not for me. For Du Siup. For the man who had thrown me away to protect a legacy that was already rotting from the inside. We have to warn him, I said, standing up. My back ached, and a sharp cramp in my side made me gasp. I leaned against the table, sweat beading on my forehead. You're in no condition for a siege, child, Song warned, catching my arm. I'm the only one who can get past the perimeter, I said, gritting my teeth through the pain. I know the blind spots. I know the codes, and I have the evidence that will turn his own men against him. I looked at the tablet one last time. A final encrypted message popped up on the screen, a high-priority alert from the estate's internal server. Breach in progress. Main gate compromised. The clock had run out. Song, get the car, I commanded, my strategic mind overriding the exhaustion of my body. If we don't move now, there won't be an empire left to save. As we raced toward the estate through the pre-dawn fog, I clutched the drive containing the decrypted proof. My eyes were fixed on the distant silhouette of the Lim mansion on the hill. Small flashes of orange light, muzzle flares, began to dance across the horizon. The siege had begun, and the Viper was already at the throat of the king. The tires of Uncle Song's sedan screeched as we hit the dirt path behind the estate. The horizon was bleeding, not with the sun, but with the orange teeth of muzzle flares. The air smelled of wet earth and cordite. My lungs burned. My stomach felt like a knot of iron. I can't go further, Song rasped, gripping the steering wheel. The perimeter sensors are active. If I cross, they'll launch a drone strike on this vehicle. I know the blind spots, I said, checking the flash drive tucked into my boot. Stay close. If I'm not out in 20 minutes, burn the evidence to the cloud. I rolled out of the car before it even stopped. I moved low, my nursing scrubs replaced by a dark tactical jacket Song had scavenged. I hit the tree line. My foster training flared to life, a cold, sharp instinct. I ignored the cramping in my womb. Just a little longer, baby. We're finishing this. I reached the western wall. Sector 7. The camera here lagged 3 seconds every minute during its thermal sweep. I counted. 1, 2, 3. I vaulted the stone, my fingers catching the ledge, my breath hitching as I hauled my weight over. I dropped into the shadows of the rose garden. The estate was a slaughterhouse. Glass shattered above. A guard fell from a second-story balcony, hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. I didn't stop to check a pulse. I moved toward the service entrance, my fingers dancing over the keypad. 09121998. The date of the betrayal. The code worked. The door hissed open. I ran through the servants' tunnels, the sound of heavy gunfire echoing through the vents. Bullets chewed marble somewhere in the grand salon. I emerged into the library, the site of our last kiss and our first war. Du Siup was there. He was behind the overturned mahogany desk, his charcoal suit shredded, blood matting his hair. He was down to his last magazine. 2 of Ji-hoon's men were closing in from the terrace, their silencers spitting puffs of gray smoke. Du Siup, I screamed. He spun, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and hallucination. I didn't wait. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and hurled it at the lead attacker's feet. I fired my stolen pistol, not at the man, but at the canister. The explosion of white chemical foam filled the air. The attackers coughed, blinded. Dusiop moved like a ghost through the haze. 2 shots, 2 bodies hitting the floor. He lunged for me, pinning me against the wall, his hand trembling as it hovered over my face. You were supposed to be safe. Why are you here? Jaehoon isn't a rival, Dusiop. He's the architect. I pulled a burner device from my pocket, wired into a portable signal booster Uncle Song had built. I have the proof. I'm going to show his men who they're really dying for. I hacked the estate's internal radio frequency. It was a simple override, a bypass I'd found in the encrypted files. I hit play. Jihoon's voice exploded over every guard's earpiece and the estate's intercom system. The king is blind. Kill the mother. I want to see the light go out in his eyes myself. Then, the ledger shifted across the screens in the security hub, digital proof of Jihoon selling limb shipments to the Kims for a decade. The gunfire outside sputtered, hesitated. He sold us out. A voice screamed over the comms. Jihoon is a rat. He's more than a rat. A new voice boomed. The library doors were kicked off their hinges. Jihyun stepped in, flanked by 4 die-hard loyalists. He looked at the screens, a sneer curling his handsome, cruel mouth. He didn't look like a man defeated. He looked like a man finally stepping out of a costume. You always were too smart for your own good. Nurse, Jihyun hissed, leveling his weapon at my chest. Dusiop stepped in front of me, shielding my body with his. It's over, Jihyun. Your men won't follow a traitor. My men? Maybe not. Jihyun laughed, a jagged, hollow sound. But what about your family, brother? Or should I say, our mother? The air in the room froze. Na Young emerged from the hallway behind Jihoon, her face a mask of ancient, suppressed grief. She wasn't a captive. She was a woman facing a ghost. Jihoon, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please, not like this. Brother? Dusiop's voice was a ragged thread. What is he talking about? The bastard son, Jihoon spat, his eyes burning with a lifetime of resentment. The one you tucked away in the shadows of the foster system, mother. The one you sacrificed to make sure Duseop's claim to the throne was pure. You didn't just kill Han's family to hide a leak. You killed them to hide me. The revelation hit like a physical blow. The foster house. The fires. It wasn't just business. It was a mother erasing her mistake. Na Young had hidden Jihoon in the same underworld where I was raised, never realizing the monster she was creating would grow to consume her perfect son. I did it for you, Dusiop. Na Young sobbed, her silk dress stained with soot. To protect the legacy. You created a war, I snapped, my hand tight on Dusiop's arm. I could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. A frantic, wounded beat. You fed your children to the wolves and wondered why they came back with fangs. Jihoon's face twisted. He was done talking. The weight of decades of exile and hatred peaked in his trigger finger. Enough legacy. I'm taking what was mine from the start. He raised his gun, aiming directly at Duseop's head. No. Na Young shrieked. She lunged forward, not toward Duseop, but toward Jihoon, her hands grasping for the weapon of the son she had abandoned. A shot rang out, a deafening singular crack that echoed through the library. Na Young crumpled. The plum silk of her coat bloomed with a sudden, violent red. She had taken the bullet meant for her heir, her body falling between the 2 brothers she had torn apart. Mother. Duseop roared. Jihoon froze, the reality of what he'd done flickering in his eyes for a split second. I didn't wait for him to recover. I grabbed the heavy glass decanter from the side table and hurled it with every ounce of my remaining strength. It shattered against Jihoon's head just as he regained his focus. He stumbled back, blood and bourbon stinging his eyes. Go. I hissed at Duseop, pulling him toward the terrace. He's not alone. We have to finish this now. But as we reached the edge of the balcony, a new shadow loomed. A helicopter with the Kim Syndicate logo was descending over the lawn. Jihoon's backup had arrived, and he was through playing fair. The helicopter's blades whipped the night air into a frenzy, a deafening roar that swallowed the screams of the dying. The wind tasted of aviation fuel and cold rain, stinging the open graze on my shoulder. On the balcony, the world seemed to contract until there was only the three of us, the air, the ghost, and the woman holding the secret of their blood. Ji-hun wiped the blood and bourbon from his eyes, his face a mask of fractured sanity. He lunged. Du-seop met him halfway. It wasn't a choreographed duel, it was a collision of lifetimes. Fists collided with bone. Du-seop, already leaking blood from his side, fought with a feral protective rage. Ji-hun fought with the bitterness of a man who had been told his whole life he didn't exist. They crashed into the stone balustrade. Du-seop's stitches tore, a fresh bloom of red soaking through his ruined shirt. "You got the silk sheets." Ji-hun roared, driving a knee into Du-seop's wounded ribs. "I got the scraps. I got the foster homes and the cold basements, while you played at being a king." Du-seop gasped, his face contorting in agony. But he didn't let go. He grabbed Ji-hun's throat, pinning him against the railing as the helicopter hovered like a vulture above the lawn. "You killed her. You shot the only person who could have given you the name you wanted. She shot herself the day she gave me away." Ji-hun screamed back. I watched them, my heart thundering against my ribs. My hand was flat against my stomach, shielding the life inside me from the vibration of the rotor wash. I couldn't shoot. The risk of hitting Du-seop was too high. I had to be the scalpel, not the sledgehammer. I reached into my tactical jacket, my fingers finding the heavy-duty sedative I'd swiped from the clinic's restricted stock. Etomidate. Fast-acting. Paralytic at high doses. I palmed the syringe, the needle glinting in the rhythmic flash of the helicopter's searchlight. Timing is everything, Ranini. Wait for the opening. A low, wet cough sounded from the doorway. Na Young was crawling. Her plum silk coat was a rag of crimson, her fingers dragging across the stone as she forced herself toward her sons. She looked small. She looked human. The untouchable matriarch was gone, replaced by a dying woman trying to reach her children. "Stop," she wheezed. It was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the roar of the engines. "Please, my sons." The distraction was enough. Ji-hun's eyes flickered toward her for a fraction of a second, a moment of hesitation from the boy who still wanted a mother's love. I moved. I didn't run. I glided, staying low. I lunged forward as they grappled, my hand snaking around Ji-hun's shoulder. I didn't aim for a vein. I didn't have the luxury of precision. I jammed the needle into the large muscle of his neck and slammed the plunger home. Ji-hun let out a choked cry, his body stiffening as the chemical fire flooded his system. He swung a backhand that caught me across the jaw, sending me reeling back against the library doors, but the damage was done. He stumbled. His limbs became leaden. The rage in his eyes turned to a glassy, terrifying confusion. Du-seop caught him as he fell, lowering his half-brother to the stone floor. "What? What did you do?" Du-seop panted, his eyes wide as he looked at me, then at the sedated man at his feet. "I gave us time," I rasped, tasting blood from my lip. The helicopter's searchlight swept over us, but the muzzle flares from the garden below had ceased. Uncle Song and the Loyalists had taken the perimeter. The Kim's backup was hovering, hesitant, realizing the man paying the bill was no longer in control. Na Young reached the brothers, her hand trembling as she touched Ji-hun's slack face, then Du-seop's bloodied hand. "I hid you. To save the line," she whispered, her voice a rattled breath of wind. "I thought if I erased you, Ji-hun, the war would never start. I thought I was protecting Du-seop from a rival claim. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I created the monster that killed me." She looked at me, her eyes clouded with the coming dark. "The nurse. She has the strength I lacked. She protects what she loves, without destroying it." She reached out, her fingers brushing my hand where it rested on my stomach. "Forgive me, both of you. Build something that isn't made of shadows." Her hand fell. The tension left her body, her final breath escaping as a soft sigh into the rain. Na Young Lim was dead, her body a bridge between the two sons she had spent a lifetime tearing apart. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire had ever been. Du-seop sat there in the rain, cradling his mother's head in his lap while his half-brother lay unconscious beside him. He looked up at me, his face a map of grief, exhaustion, and a dawning, terrible clarity. "He's my brother," Dusiop whispered. "He's a murderer," I said, stepping forward to kneel beside him. I placed my calloused hand over his scarred knuckles. "But he's also a product of this house. We don't execute him, Dusiop. That's the old way. We give him to the authorities with the evidence I found. We choose justice. For the baby. For the future." Dusiop looked at Ji-hoon, then back at me. The lethal coldness in his eyes, the Shadow Emperor's mask, cracked. He leaned his forehead against mine, his tears mingling with the rain on my cheeks. "You're the only truth I have left," he murmured. Below us, the helicopter began to veer away, its pilots realizing the Lim estate had a new, undisputed ruler. Sirens began to wail in the distance, a blue and red pulse echoing against the clouds. The guards who had switched sides stood at the balcony doors, their heads bowed in a silent oath of loyalty. I felt a sharp, sudden flutter in my lower abdomen. A kick. A tiny, defiant reminder that life persists even in the wreckage of empires. "The baby," I whispered, taking Dusiop's hand and placing it over the spot. "He's awake." Dusiop's breath hitched as he felt the movement. For the first time since I'd met him, the tension left his shoulders. He pulled me into his chest, holding me as if I were the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. The first gray light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, bleeding into the smoke and the rain. The estate was a ruin. The legacy was a lie. But as the sun broke through the fog, I realized we weren't just survivors. We were the architects of what came next. The smell of gunpowder and wet marble has long since been replaced by the scent of lavender and fresh ginger tea. The Lim estate is no longer a tomb of secrets, it is a fortress of life. Sun-drenched and vibrant, the nursery windows are open, letting in the brisk New York spring. I looked down at the twin bundles in my arms, Hana and Jun. One has Dusiop's intense midnight gaze. The other has the mahogany warmth of my skin. They are the living bridge between two bloodlines that once tried to annihilate each other. The inventory reports are mismatched. "Mrs. Lim," a voice grumbled from the doorway. It was Chairman O, an old guard associate who still smelled of tobacco and patriarchal doubt. Perhaps the numbers are too complex for a domestic transition. I didn't even look up from Jun's sleeping face. "The mismatch isn't in my math, Chairman. It's in the offshore account you opened in the Cayman Islands last Tuesday to skim the Busan shipping dividends. I've already rerouted the funds to the estate's security trust. Try it again, and I won't just take your bonus, I'll take your seat." The silence that followed was delicious. He scurried away, realizing that the nurse was the one who had rewritten the Empire's encryption from the ground up. I don't just heal the man, I protect the kingdom. A pair of strong, familiar arms wrapped around my waist. Dusiop pressed a kiss to the crown of my head, his scent of sandalwood and expensive ink grounding me. He slid a box onto the table. Inside was a ring, a deep honey gold band set with a raw, uncut black diamond and a vibrant green jade. "The diamond for your strength," he whispered, his voice like velvet over steel. "The jade for the heritage we share. Stay with me, Ranini. Not as a guest or a ward, but as my equal. My wife." I turned in his arms, the ring catching the light of the new dawn. I thought back to that sterile clinic, the sting of Na Young's palm, and the rising nausea of a secret that felt like a death sentence. "One slap," I murmured, pressing my lips to his. She thought she was putting me in my place. She didn't realize she was sparking the fuse of our empire. He smiled, a rare, genuine curve of his lips that reached his eyes. "Let them try to strike us again. We're ready." I looked out over the sprawling lawn where the grass had finally grown over the scars of the siege. We are the architects. And this legacy is finally ours.
Best story ever. She's a bad sister. I love this story. I'm listening to it twice.